Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3. In episode 3, we're going to be continuing to talk about negative numbers. And in this episode, we're going to be focused on multiplying and dividing negative numbers. Now, before I start talking about how we multiply and divide negative numbers, I want to talk about what are called even numbers and odd numbers. When someone says an even number, they're talking about a number that you can get by counting from 0 by twos. So, for example, if I list the numbers that I can get by counting from 0, either up or down, but mainly in the up direction, then 0 itself would count as even. And if I count by twos, 1, 2, 2 is also even, 4 is also even, 6 and 8, and so on. And if I count backwards, so is -2, -4, -6, -8, and so on. So all of these numbers would be called even because I can get them by counting from 0 by twos. Now, the odd numbers are all of the ones in this list that are not even. So those numbers would be -1, +1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on. All of the other numbers that are not even are odd. So those are what these words mean: even number and odd number. Put another way, even numbers are the ones that can be divided cleanly by 2. And the odd numbers are the ones that cannot be cleanly divided by 2. For example, 6 divided by 2 is a nice clean number, 3 units. But 5 divided by 2, that's not a division that will give you a nice whole number result. Now that we've talked about that, I want to talk to you about the process for multiplying and dividing integers, doing multiplication and division where there might be some negative numbers involved. Now, when you're multiplying and dividing, and there might be some negative numbers involved, the first thing that you want to do is count the number of minus symbols in your multiplication or your division problem. Count the number of minus symbols. Once you've counted the number of negative signs, the next thing that you want to do is multiply slash divide, depending on what you're asked to do, the numbers as if they were all positive. And once you have done that, you decide if the final answer should be positive or negative based on the number of minus signs you counted in step number 1. If you got an even number of minus signs, the final answer should be positive. And if you got an odd number of minus signs, the final answer should be negative. Let me show you what I am talking about in the following example. Here it says, I want you to calculate -6 divided by 3. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this problem and I'm going to notice that I have just one minus sign. just one minus sign in this problem attached to 6. Then I'm going to divide the two numbers as if they were both positive. So I'm going to divide positive 6 by positive 3. So if I have 6 objects and I'm dividing them evenly among 3 groups, then the result is that each group is going to contain 2 objects. Then I'm going to decide if the final answer should be positive 2 or negative 2 based on the number of minus signs in my problem. I counted one minus sign in my problem, and this is an odd number. The number 1 is odd. So that means my final answer should be negative. So in this case, my final answer would be 2 with a negative sign attached. Negative 2 would be my answer to this question of what is minus 6 divided by 3. Let's check, see if this makes sense. If I had a pile containing 6 negative objects, and I divided these 6 negative objects into 3 groups, then each group would end up containing 2 negative objects. 2 negative objects in each group, therefore my answer was negative 2 from this division. Let's do another example. Suppose someone asked me to calculate negative 8 divided by negative 2. So in this situation, I would start by counting the number of minus signs in this situation. So here I have 2 minus signs, one on negative 8 and one on negative 2. And I'm going to acknowledge that this is an even number of minus signs. 2 is an even number. Then I'm going to divide the two numbers as if they were both positive. 2 dividing 8, 2 goes into 8 4 times. And now, because my number of negative signs was even, I'm going to have a positive final answer. And from that, I get positive 4 as my final answer to this question. Once again, if I think about what division represents in terms of the tiles, if I think about negative 8 divided by negative 2, I could think about it as asking the question, what if I had negative 8 objects, 8 negative objects, and I wanted to split them up into piles where every pile contained negative 2 items in it? How many groups could I make? Well, if I split these two into one group, and I split these two into another group, and I split these two into another group, and these two into another group, in total I have made 1, 2, 3, 4 piles containing those objects. So 4 piles containing negative 2 objects each gives me an answer of 4 for negative 8 divided into groups of size negative 2. Someone says to me, calculate negative 3 times negative 2 times negative 5. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this problem and I'm going to count the number of minus signs in this problem. Negative 3, negative 2, negative 5. In total, I have 3 minus signs in this product. And 3 is an odd number. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply these numbers together as if all of them were positive. So 3 times 2 times 5. And if I do that by PEMDAS, taking the products one at a time, going from left to right, I get 30 from 3 times 2 times 5. Now, my final answer to this, because I got an odd number of minus signs, is going to be negative. And so my final answer to this question would be negative 30. Negative 30 is the result of minus 3 times minus 2 times minus 5. And this makes sense because by having these three minus signs in this product, it's almost like we're taking the opposite 3 times. So one opposite takes a positive number and makes it negative. The second opposite takes that negative and makes it positive. The third opposite takes that positive and makes it negative again. So three minus signs, three opposites, is giving me a negative answer in the end. Okay, and what if someone said calculate 2 times negative 3 times 4, and then that whole thing divided by 6? If I follow PEMDAS here, I remember that I have to start this calculation by completing the product on top of this bar. We remember from episode 1 that when you see this bar, there are hidden parentheses on the top and on the bottom of the bar. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to complete this product. This product has a single minus sign, so I know that the final answer is going to be negative because I've only got the one minus sign. And so I'm going to take 2 times 3 times 4, and I'm going to make that result negative. So 2 times 3 times 4 is 6 times 4 is 24. And so then I'm going to make that result negative because I had one minus sign. Then I am going to complete the second step of PEMDAS, which is to divide that negative 24 by 6. Now in this division, once again, I have a single minus sign here. So I know my answer to this is going to be negative in the end. And so if I take 24 and divide it by 6, 6 goes into 24 4 times. And so my final answer to this would be negative 4 in the end. And this makes sense. If you look at the original problem, there was overall in the entire problem just one minus sign. So because there was one minus sign throughout the entire problem, our final answer was negative as well. Now, here's a special case when you're multiplying specifically by negative 1. If someone says, what is negative 1 times 3? Here I notice I have just one minus sign, so I'll take 1 times 3, but of course 1 times 3 is just 3 again, right? And then I will apply a negative sign from that 1 minus to the final answer. So negative 1 times 3 ended up being the opposite of 3. And if I do that in another example, if I do negative 1 times negative 7, here I have 1, 2 negative signs. That's an even number of minus signs. So my answer is going to be positive. And so if I do 1 times 7, and I keep the answer positive, then I'll get positive 7 from that. And so once again, I'm seeing that multiplying by negative 1 has given me the result which is the opposite of the negative 7 I started with. So what we can see from these two examples is that multiplying by negative 1 has the same effect as taking the opposite. It's actually even the same if you divide by minus 1. So if I was, for example, thinking about negative 1 times negative 6, that was going to give me exactly the same answer as negative 6 divided by negative 1. And that's going to give me exactly the same answer as the opposite of negative 6. Every single one of these expressions is going to give you exactly the same result in the end. In the end, positive 6. So multiplying by 1 and dividing by 1 are exactly the same action as just taking the opposite of the number. Now, before we conclude this part of the episode, I just want to talk about multiplication and division by specifically 0. When you take a number and you multiply it by specifically 0, the number 0 is always what results. For example, if I said 2 times negative 5 times 0 in that product, if I ever have a product with 0, the result of that is always going to be 0 in the end. When you divide 0 by some other number, once again, dividing 0 by another number always causes 0 to be the result. So if I have 0 and I divide it by, 5 times negative 7, if I have 0 divided by 5 times negative 7, it doesn't matter because if you divide 0 by any number, the result of that is going to be 0 in the end. Now this is different than if you try to divide by 0. If you try to divide by 0, you're going to run into an issue. If I have 5 objects, or for that matter, even negative 5 objects, and I try to split it among 0 people, like what am I even doing at that point? It's not division if there are no people to divide the objects among. So what I've written down here, dividing over 0 groups, dividing over 0 people, what I've written down here doesn't make any sense. And if you try and calculate this in a calculator, you're going to run into some issues. To type in negative 5 divided by, so here's the division symbol, negative 5 divided by 0, it will give you an error. It gives you a division by 0 error. This is not something that makes sense, so this is not something that anyone can calculate, and the calculator cannot do it either.